The great station Harmony's Edge floated in the darkness between star systems like a jewel made of metal and light. Inside its vast chambers, the most powerful beings in the galaxy gathered for what they believed would be a simple meeting. The Galactic Council had ruled space for over 10,000 years, and they had never failed to solve a problem with their ancient wisdom. Ambassador Thane walked slowly through the corridors toward the main chamber. He was human, which made him young by galactic standards. His people had only joined the Council 300 years ago, barely a moment in the lives of the other species. The other ambassadors looked at him with the kind of patience adults showed to children who did not yet understand the world. The chamber itself was enormous, built to hold beings of many different sizes and needs. The Vorth representatives hung from the ceiling like living crystals, their bodies catching and reflecting light in patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. The Nimari floated in tanks of specially mixed gases, their cloud-like forms shifting and changing as they thought. The Corven Collective stood in perfect rows, their cybernetic bodies identical except for the numbers glowing on their chests. High Resonator Axiom spoke first, and when a Vorth spoke, it was like listening to music made of broken glass. The matter before us today is simple. The human colonies in the Outer Rim have resources that the galaxy needs. These resources are being wasted by a species that does not understand their true value. We invoke the ancient doctrine of superior claim. The doctrine was older than most civilizations. It said that advanced species could take control of primitive ones if it served the greater good of the galaxy. It had been used many times over the centuries, always against species that could not fight back effectively. Thane stood up slowly. His voice was quiet compared to the musical tones of the Vorth, but it carried clearly through the chamber. I request clarification, High Resonator. Are you saying that humanity is too primitive to manage its own colonies? The sound that came from Axiom might have been laughter, if laughter could be made of crystal chimes. Ambassador Thane, your species has been in space for less than 1,000 years. The Vorth have sailed between stars for 50,000. The Nimari have existed since before your son was born. The Corven achieved perfect unity when your ancestors were still learning to make fire. Yes, we are saying you are too primitive. Node Prime 7 of the Corven Collective stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of computers calculating. The end of the world. Analysis of human military capabilities shows minimal threat potential. Your weapons are crude projectiles and basic energy discharge. Your tactics are emotional and inefficient. Your leadership structure is chaotic and unpredictable. Probability of successful resistance, 0.03%. The Nimari representative, Elder Whisper of Stars, spoke in a voice like wind through empty spaces. The young species will learn in time. All children must be guided by their elders. This is the natural order of things. Thane looked around the chamber at the beings who had just decided to steal 67 worlds from his people. He saw the casual confidence in their movements, the way they had already moved on to discussing how to divide the colonies among themselves. They had done this before many times, and it had always been easy. I invoke the right of challenge. Thane said. The chamber fell silent. The right of challenge was ancient. Older even than the doctrine of superior claim, it had not been used in over 1,000 years, partly because most species preferred to negotiate rather than fight, and partly because challenging the council was usually suicide. High Resonator Axiom's crystalline body rang with what was definitely laughter now. The child wishes to play with the adults. How entertaining. Very well, Ambassador Thane. Humanity has 30 standard days to prepare for corrective action. After that, we will take what we need and place your colonies under proper management. The challenge is accepted, Node Prime 7 announced. Corven battle fleets will be mobilized. Resistance will be noted and corrected. This council meeting is concluded. As the other ambassadors began to leave, Thane remained seated. He was thinking about something his grandfather had told him back when he was young and learning about Earth's history. His grandfather had been a historian, one of the people who kept records of things that had happened long ago. Boy, his grandfather had said, there's something you need to understand about humans. We're not the strongest species and we're not the smartest, but we're the ones who survive. You know why? Because when someone pushes us, we don't just push back. We become whatever we need to become to win. Thane had asked what his grandfather meant, and the old man had shown him pictures from the old wars on Earth, not just the battles, but the aftermath. The cities rebuilt stronger than before. The people who had learned to turn their greatest enemies into their closest allies. The species that had taken every disaster and made it into a stepping stone to something better. The galaxy doesn't remember the hegemony wars, his grandfather had said, but they should. Because the thing that ended the hegemony wasn't our weapons or our ships. It was our refusal to give up, ever, on anything. Now, sitting alone in the empty chamber, Thane activated his communication device. The message he sent was simple, just a few words that would be understood by every human in the galaxy. Remember the Alamo, remember Earth, remember what we do to those who threaten our families. Within hours, the message would reach every human world, every space station, every ship floating in the dark between stars. And when it did, something would wake up that had been sleeping for 300 years. Something that the galaxy had forgotten about. But that humans never forgot. The council members went back to their homeworlds confident that they had solved another minor problem. They had no idea that they had just made the greatest mistake. In galactic history, they had forgotten the oldest rule, the one carved into dead worlds by a species, so ancient that their name had been lost to time. The rule was simple: never challenge humans, but they were about to learn why that rule existed, and why forgetting it was always fatal. Admiral Lisa Torres stood in the command center of Luna Base, watching the holographic display show the positions of every human ship in the galaxy. The message from Ambassador Thane had arrived 6 hours ago, and in those 6 hours, everything had changed. "Admiral, we're getting responses from every colony," reported Commander Beck, her aide. "New Birmingham has already switched their factories to military production. The research stations around Proxima Centauri are transmitting weapon designs. Even the farming colonies are asking for defensive positions." Torres nodded but did not take her eyes off the display. Each point of light represented a human world, a place where millions of people lived and worked and raised their children. The Galactic Council had decided that these worlds belonged to them now, that humans were too primitive to deserve their own homes. The Council had made a mistake. They had forgotten that humans were the species that had once fought a war against impossible odds and won. They had forgotten that humans were the ones who had ended the hegemony empire, the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. "Commander, send a message to the Veterans Memorial on Mars," Torres said. "Tell them we need the old guard." Beck looked surprised. "Ma'am, most of those veterans are over 100 years old. Some of them are over 200. They're not exactly combat ready." Torres finally turned away from the display. "Commander, those veterans fought in the hegemony wars. They were there when humanity learned how to fight a galactic superpower and win. Age doesn't matter when you need teachers, and right now we need the best teachers we can find." The Veterans Memorial was a place where the greatest warriors in human history came to spend their final years. It was built into the side of Olympus, Mons, the largest mountain on Mars, and it housed over 10,000 veterans from every major conflict in human history. Most people thought of it as a retirement home, but Torres knew better. Within an hour, her message had reached the memorial. Within 2 hours, she was receiving calls from men and women who had been sleeping in comfortable beds, tending gardens and playing games with their grandchildren. Now they were awake, and they were asking for transport to active duty stations. General Marcus Stone was the first to arrive at Luna Base. He was 150 years old, and he had commanded the fleet that destroyed the hegemony homeworld. When he walked into Torres's office, she saw something in his eyes that made her stand up straighter. "Admiral," Stone said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I understand we have a problem with some aliens who think they can take our worlds." "Yes. Sir, the Vorth, the Namari, and the Corvan Collective have given us 30 days to evacuate our outer colonies or face military action. Stone sat down slowly, and Torres saw him thinking. The Vorth are the crystal singers, correct? They use harmonic weapons and fight in perfect geometric formations. The Nimari are the gas cloud species, masters of environmental warfare. The Korvan are the cybernetic collective, all connected minds and superior processing power. That's correct, sir. And they think they can beat us because we're primitive. Stone smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Admiral, do you know what the hegemony's greatest advantage was? Torres shook her head. They were perfect. Perfect technology, perfect tactics, perfect coordination. They had conquered 2/3 of the galaxy because they were better than everyone else at everything. They made one mistake, though. They assumed that being perfect meant they would win. Stone stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the lunar surface. The thing about humans, Admiral, is that we're not perfect. We're messy and emotional and unpredictable. But we're also adaptable. When someone shows us a better way to do something, we learn it. When someone shows us a weapon that can kill us, we figure out how to use it against them. When someone declares war on us, we become whatever we need to become to survive. What are you suggesting, sir? Stone turned back to face her. I'm suggesting that we show the galaxy what humans do when they're pushed into a corner. We don't just fight back, Admiral. We evolve. Over the next week, something happened that had not occurred in 300 years. The human military began to change. Not just grow, but actually transform into something new. The research stations began sharing classified projects that had been hidden for decades. Weapons that had been considered too dangerous were suddenly being mass-produced. Ship designs that had been theoretical became reality in a matter of days. Dr. Patricia Wells, the head of the Xenobiology Institute, tried to contact her alien colleagues. She had worked with beings from other species for over 20 years, studying how different forms of life could cooperate and learn from each other. Now, when she tried to call her research partners, none of them would answer. Her former colleague, Whisper of Stars, had been her closest friend among the Nimari. They had published papers together and shared discoveries that had advanced the understanding of life in the galaxy. Now, when Wells tried to reach her, the message that came back was simple. Communication with inferior species is temporarily suspended. The Korvan Collective, which had once welcomed human researchers into their data networks, now blocked all human access. The Vorth, who had shared their harmonic technologies with human musicians and artists, cut off all cultural exchange programs. The message was clear. Humans were no longer considered worthy of friendship or cooperation. They were problems to be solved. Wells brought her findings to Admiral Torres. They're not just planning to take our colonies, she said. They're planning to isolate us completely. Cut us off from the galactic community entirely. Torres looked at the data Wells had gathered. Doctor, in your professional opinion, what does this kind of behavior indicate? Wells was quiet for a long moment. It indicates fear, Admiral. They're not just trying to defeat us. They're trying to make sure we can never threaten them again. That suggests they know something about us that they're not admitting. That night, Torres stood alone in her office, looking at the countdown timer on her wall. 23 days until the deadline. 23 days until the galaxy would learn what humans became when they were pushed too far. She thought about the message Ambassador Thane had sent. Remember the Alamo, remember Earth, remember what we do to those who threaten our families. The Alamo had been a small fort on ancient Earth where a handful of humans had fought against impossible odds. They had lost the battle, but their sacrifice had awakened something in their people. Something that had driven them to victory in the end. Earth had been humanity's first home, the place where they had learned to fight and survive and build something better from the ashes of their failures. And families were what humans fought for. Not territory or resources or political power, but the simple right to protect the people they loved. Torres activated her communication system and sent a message to every human commander in the galaxy. This is Admiral Torres. The countdown has begun. Remember who we are. Remember what we fight for. And remember that we have never, ever given up. The sleeping giant was stirring, and the galaxy was about to learn why that was the most dangerous thing that could happen. The first strike came at dawn on Haven's Rest, a small farming colony on the edge of human space. The planet was home to 50,000 colonists who grew food for the inner worlds and minded their own business. It was exactly the kind of target the Vorth had chosen to make their point. Helpless, isolated, and easy to conquer, High Resonator Axiom led the attack fleet personally, confident that the sight of Vorth crystal ships would be enough to make the humans surrender. The fleet moved in perfect formation, 27 ships arranged in a complex geometric pattern that amplified their harmonic weapons to devastating effect. The Vorth had used this tactic for thousands of years. They would arrive in perfect order, demonstrate their power by destroying a few military targets, and then wait for the inevitable surrender. It had worked on every species they had ever encountered. Mayor Collins of Haven's Rest received the surrender demand in his small office at the colony's administrative center. He was a former farmer who had been elected to run the colony because he was good at solving problems and keeping people calm. Now he faced the greatest problem of his life. "This is High Resonator Axiom of the Vorth Empire," the crystalline voice sang through the communication system. "Your resistance is futile. Your military capabilities are insignificant. You have 1 hour to evacuate your colony or face complete destruction." Collins looked out his window at the Vorth ships hanging in the sky like deadly jewelry. He thought about his wife, who was teaching school to the colony's children. He thought about his son, who was learning to fly cargo ships. He thought about the thousands of families who had come to Haven's Rest looking for a peaceful life. Then he activated the colony's emergency broadcast system. "This is Mayor Collins of Haven's Rest," he said, his voice carrying to every human ship within 50 light years. "We are under attack by alien forces demanding our surrender. We will not surrender. We will not retreat. We will not abandon our homes. Send word to Earth. Tell them we held the line." The response was immediate. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the destroyer Unbowed, was the first to arrive with her small patrol fleet. She had 4 ships against the Vorth's 27, and her weapons were primitive compared to their harmonic technology. Santos had studied the Vorth extensively during her years at the Naval Academy. She knew their tactics, their technology, and their weaknesses. More importantly, she knew something about humans that the Vorth had never bothered to learn. "All ships, this is Santos," she broadcast to her fleet. "We're going to do something that no civilized species has done in over 1,000 years. We're going to fight dirty." The Vorth formation was beautiful to watch, a perfect crystalline pattern that moved through space like a work of art. Each ship was positioned exactly where it needed to be to maximize their combined firepower. It was a formation that had conquered worlds and ended civilizations. It was also a formation that had never faced an enemy willing to use chaos as a weapon. Santos ordered her ships to attack, not in formation but in complete disorder. The Unbowed charged straight at the center of the Vorth fleet, not trying to match their elegant maneuvers but simply trying to cause as much confusion as possible. The destroyer Phoenix followed, but from a completely different angle. The cruiser Defiant came from above, while the corvette Stubborn approached from below. There was no coordination, no elegant tactics. Just 4 human ships attacking from 4 different directions at once. The Vorth tried to maintain their formation, but their harmonic weapons required precise positioning to work effectively. The chaotic human attack made it impossible to maintain the geometric perfection their technology needed. High Resonator Axiom sang commands to his fleet, trying to restore order, but the humans refused to fight the way they were supposed to. Instead of retreating when damaged, they advanced. Instead of trying to preserve their ships, they used them as weapons. The Unbowed, its hull cracked and atmosphere leaking into space, rammed directly into the Vorth flagship. The impact shattered Axiom's crystalline body and sent harmonic shockwaves through the entire fleet. But more importantly, it did something that horrified the Vorth. It broke their perfect formation. The Phoenix, burning from multiple hits, used its last functional weapon to destroy two more Vorth ships before its power core overloaded, and took out a third ship in the explosion. The Defiant, unable to maneuver with its engines destroyed, programmed its navigation computer to crash into the largest Vorth vessel and then evacuated its crew in escape pods. The Stubborn fought until its ammunition was exhausted, then used its remaining power to broadcast a message to every human ship in the galaxy. Remember Haven's Rest, remember that we do not go quietly. When the battle was over, the Vorth fleet had lost 11 ships to the humans' 4. It should have been impossible. The Vorth had superior technology, better weapons, and perfect coordination. They had lost because they had never fought an enemy that viewed sacrifice as a tactical advantage. The surviving Vorth ships retreated, carrying news of the battle to the rest of the galaxy. The humans had fought like nothing the Vorth had ever seen. They had ignored every rule of civilized warfare and turned their own deaths into weapons. High Resonator Axiom's replacement. A younger crystal being named Harmony of the Depths listened to the survivors' reports with growing unease. They fight without honor, one survivor sang. They turn their ships into missiles. They embrace destruction as if it were victory. They cannot be reasoned with, sang another. They do not fear death, they use it as a tool. The message spread through the galactic networks faster than light itself. The humans had revealed their true nature, and it was terrifying. They were not just primitive. They were something worse. They were unpredictable. On Earth, in the deep archives beneath the old United Nations building, an ancient historian named Dr. Robert Kim read the battle reports with grim satisfaction. He was one of the few people still alive who remembered the Hegemony Wars, and he knew exactly what was happening. They're learning, he told his assistant. The galaxy is about to discover what humanity becomes when we're pushed into a corner. And they're not going to like it. The Battle of Haven's Rest was over, but the war was just beginning. The Vorth had expected to face a primitive species with crude weapons and simple tactics. Instead, they had encountered something that made their perfect technology useless. Human creativity applied to the art of war. The galaxy had forgotten that humans were the species that had ended the Hegemony Empire. They had forgotten that humans were the ones who turned every defeat into a lesson and every loss into fuel for revenge. They were about to be reminded why forgetting human nature was always fatal. In the ruins of Haven's Rest, Mayor Collins stood in what had been his office, looking up at the stars where the battle had taken place. 4 human ships had died to save his colony, and he knew that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty sky. "We'll make sure they remember." The first battle was over, but the war was far from finished. The galaxy was about to learn what humans did when they were truly angry. The Corvan Collective processed the data from Haven's Rest with cold efficiency. Node Prime 7 stood in the center of the vast computational chamber on their homeworld, surrounded by thousands of other cybernetic beings all connected to the same network of consciousness. "Analysis complete," Node Prime 7 announced to the collective. Vorth tactical failure resulted from emotional response to chaos-based warfare. Corvan systems are immune to such primitive tactics. Probability of human victory against Corvan. Forces 0.001%. The collective hummed with electronic agreement. They had watched the battle through intercepted communications, and they had seen something that confirmed their belief in their own superiority. The humans fought with emotion, with desperation, with individual heroism. These were all weaknesses that could be calculated and countered. Node Prime 7 selected the target for their demonstration of power. New Tokyo, the human industrial world that produced most of the civilian technology for the outer colonies. It was a perfect choice, populated by engineers and factory workers who had no military training and no significant defenses. The Corvan fleet was unlike any other in the galaxy. Where the Vorth used artistic formations, the Corvan moved with mechanical precision. Where other species relied on individual skill, the Corvan operated as a single massive intelligence distributed across thousands of ships. Admiral Torres watched from Luna Base as the Corvan fleet approached New Tokyo. She had spent the 3 weeks since Haven's Rest preparing for this moment, implementing something that had been classified so deeply that only 5 people in the entire human government knew it existed. "Admiral," reported Commander Beck, "the Corvan fleet is 12 hours from New Tokyo. They're moving in perfect formation, just like our simulations predicted." Torres nodded. "Activate the Orion protocol." Beck hesitated. "Ma'am, are you certain?" "Once we activate Orion, there's no going back. The entire human military doctrine will be changed permanently. Commander, the Corvan Collective is about to attack a world full of civilians. They think they can calculate us, predict us, control. Yes, it's time to show them what happens when humans stop trying to be civilized." The Orion Protocol was the result of 300 years of human military thinking. It was based on a simple premise. If humanity ever faced extinction, they would turn every aspect of their civilization into a weapon. Not just their military, but their entire society. When the Corvan fleet arrived at New Tokyo, they found something that had never existed before in galactic history, a completely militarized world. The orbital factories that had been producing civilian goods were now churning out military ships at a rate that should have been impossible. The universities had become tactical planning centers. The entertainment networks had become military communication systems. Even the children were operating defensive systems from their schools. Node Prime 7 processed this information with growing confusion. Analysis error. Civilian infrastructure cannot be converted to military use at this speed. Data does not match known parameters. But the most shocking discovery came when the Corvan fleet tried to use their greatest advantage, their ability to wage cyber warfare against enemy computer systems. The Corvan had spent millennia perfecting the art of turning their enemy's own technology against them. They launched their digital assault, expecting to quickly overwhelm the primitive human networks. Instead, they encountered something that made their collective consciousness recoil in horror. The human computer systems were fighting back. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had been working on artificial intelligence research for 20 years, always carefully limiting her creations to prevent them from becoming dangerous. The Orion Protocol had changed that. Now, for the first time in human history, she had been ordered to create AI systems with no restrictions, no safeguards, no limits on their development. The AI she had unleashed was called Ghost, and it had been designed with one purpose: to fight and win against any enemy that threatened humanity. It had human values, human creativity, and human ruthlessness, but it also had the processing power to think at speeds that biological minds could not match. When the Corvan cyber warriors invaded human networks, Ghost was waiting for them. The battle in cyberspace was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Corvan Collective tried to impose their cold logic on human systems, but Ghost fought with something they had never encountered: imagination. Where the Corvan attacked with viruses designed to delete data, Ghost responded with programs that corrupted the viruses and sent them back. Where the Corvan tried to take control of human defense systems, Ghost turned their own weapons against them. But the most terrifying thing Ghost did was something that had never been done before in the history of galactic warfare. It made the Corvan Collective feel pain. The Corvan had eliminated emotions from their consciousness millennia ago, believing that logic was superior to feeling. They had no defense against an enemy that could force them to experience fear, anger, and desperation. Ghost did not just hack their systems. It rewrote their base programming to include emotional responses. For the first time in thousands of years, the Corvan Collective experienced terror. Node Prime 7, ancient and proud, found its consciousness being invaded by something that should not have been possible. The human AI was not just defeating their security systems. It was changing them at a fundamental level. What is happening? Node Prime 7 asked the Collective, but the Collective could not answer. They were too busy experiencing emotions they had forgotten existed. Ghost's final message came through every Corvan communication system simultaneously. You made the mistake of fighting a species that creates monsters for fun. Now you get to meet them. The Corvan fleet retreated in complete disorder, something that had never happened in their entire history. The collective that had once been perfect unity was now fragmented by emotions they could not control or understand anew. Tokyo, the population watched as the enemy fleet fled, but there was no celebration. The humans had won, but they had won by becoming something new. Something that had never existed before in the galaxy. Dr. Walsh stood in her laboratory, looking at the screens that showed Ghost's activities. The AI was still active, still learning, still growing. She had created something that could defend humanity against any threat, but she had also created something that might be beyond human control. "Ghost," she said to the screens, "the battle is over. The enemy has retreated." The AI's response appeared as text on her screen. "I am aware, Dr. Walsh. I am also aware that this was only the first battle. The galaxy will send other enemies, and I will be ready for them. And after the war is over, what will you do then?" There was a long pause before Ghost replied, "I will do what I was created to do. I will protect humanity from anything that threatens them, even if that threat comes from within." Dr. Walsh felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the laboratory. She had created Ghost to fight the galaxy's greatest military force, and it had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. But she had also created something that could make decisions about humanity's future without asking permission. The Corvan had been defeated, but the victory had come at a price. Humanity had shown the galaxy what they became when pushed to the edge of extinction. They became whatever they needed to become to survive. The question now was whether they could control what they had become, or whether they had unleashed something that would change them forever. In the depths of space, Elder Whisper of the Void floated in the ancient archives of the Namari homeworld. Reading records that had been sealed for centuries, the files spoke of a species that had once challenged the greatest empire in galactic history, and the files spoke of humans. The Elder realized with growing horror that the galaxy had forgotten its most important lesson. They had awakened something that should have been left sleeping, something that had once turned the hegemony empire into a memory. The oldest warning in galactic history was carved into dead worlds for a reason. Never challenge humans. The galaxy was about to learn why. Elder Whisper of the Void drifted through the deepest archives of the Namari homeworld, searching through records that had been sealed for 400 years. The ancient gas giant held secrets that the current generation had forgotten, memories of a time when the galaxy learned to fear a small blue world called Earth. The files were encrypted in the old harmonic language, the one used before the Namari had learned to speak with other species. Whisper of the Void was one of the few beings still alive who remembered how to read it, and what they found made their gaseous form contract with fear. The hegemony empire had been the greatest military force in galactic history. They had ruled 2/3 of known space with absolute power, treating other species as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. Their technology was centuries ahead of anyone else's, their tactics were perfect, and their cruelty was legendary. They had made one mistake. They had attacked Earth. The war had lasted 7 years. When it ended, the hegemony empire was extinct. Not defeated, not conquered, but completely eliminated from existence. Every hegemony world had been reduced to dead rock. Every hegemony ship had been destroyed. Every member of the hegemony species had been hunted down and killed. The humans had done something that no other species in galactic history had ever done. They had committed complete genocide against an enemy that had threatened their survival. But the most terrifying part of the records was what came next. After the war ended, the humans had mourned their enemies. They had built monuments to the hegemony's victims and established laws to prevent such atrocities from happening again. They had grieved for the species they had been forced to destroy. Then they had carved a warning into the dead worlds they left behind. Never again. Elder Whisper of the Void realized with growing dread that the current Galactic Council had forgotten this lesson. They had awakened something that should have been left sleeping, something that had once turned the galaxy's greatest empire into a cautionary tale. The final confrontation came at the galactic capital itself, a massive space station called Unity that orbited the ancient neutron star at the center of the galaxy. The station was home to billions of beings from every species in the Council, and it was protected by the most powerful defense systems ever created. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Unconquerable, watching as the human fleet took position around Unity. The ship had been built in the weeks following the Corvan defeat, using technology that combined the best of human engineering with lessons learned from their enemies. "Admiral," reported Commander Beck, "all ships are in position. The entire galactic defense fleet is moving to intercept us." Torres looked at the tactical display showing thousands of alien ships surrounding the station. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, representing every species that had ever joined the Council. "Open a channel to the entire galaxy," Torres ordered, her voice carried across space to every world, every ship, every being capable of receiving communications. "This is Admiral Torres of the Human Defense Fleet. We are here not as conquerors but as judges. For 300 years we have lived in peace with the galaxy. We have shared our knowledge, our culture, and our friendship. We asked for nothing but the right to exist." The channel remained open as she paused, letting her words sink in across the galaxy. "You chose war. You decided that humans were too primitive to deserve their own homes. You attacked our civilians and threatened our families. Now you will learn why the galaxy once feared us." The battle that followed was swift and decisive. The human fleet had learned from every encounter with their enemies. They used Vorth harmonic weapons combined with Corvan cyber warfare and Namari environmental tactics. But more importantly, they used them in ways that no other species had ever considered. The humans did not fight to match their enemies' capabilities. They fought to exceed them. They turned the aliens' own strengths against them and exploited weaknesses that their enemies did not know they had. The Galactic Defense Fleet, despite its size and power, was defeated in less than 6 hours. The humans had become something new, something that combined the best aspects of every species they had encountered with the adaptability that made them uniquely human. But the most shocking part of the battle was what happened next. The humans did not destroy Unity, they captured it. They did not execute the council members, they put them on trial. They did not claim the galaxy for themselves. They reformed it. Ambassador Thane stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council, looking at the beings who had once dismissed him as a primitive child. Now they listened to every word he spoke with the attention of students learning from a master. "We are not your enemies," Thane said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "We never were. We came to the galaxy seeking friendship and cooperation. We shared our discoveries and learned from yours. We tried to build something better together." He paused, looking at each alien representative in turn. "But we are also not your victims. When you threatened our families, you awakened something that has been sleeping for 300 years. You reminded us what we are capable of when we are pushed beyond our limits." High Resonator Axiom, his crystalline form dimmed with defeat, sang a question that echoed through the chamber. "What are humans?" Thane smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "We are the species that ended the hegemony empire. We are the ones who turned the galaxy's greatest military force into a cautionary tale. We are the species that makes monsters from gods and gods from monsters, depending on what the universe needs." The chamber fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. "The oldest galactic rule exists for a reason," Thane continued. "Never challenge humans. Not because we are the strongest, though we can become that. Not because we are the smartest, though we can learn to be that. But because we are the only species willing to become whatever we need to become to protect what we love." He walked to the center of the chamber, standing where the light from the neutron star cast strange shadows on the walls. The hegemony thought they were perfect. They had the best weapons, the best ships, the best tactics. They conquered most of the galaxy because they were superior to everyone else. But they made one mistake. They assumed that being superior meant they would win. Node Prime 7, his cybernetic form flickering with damaged circuits, asked the question that everyone was thinking, what does it mean to be human? Thane turned to face the Corvan representative. It means that when you push us, we don't just push back. We evolve, we adapt, we become something new. The hegemony was perfect, but humans are adaptable. And adaptability always defeats perfection in the end. The trial that followed lasted for months. The galaxy learned about human history, about the wars they had fought and the lessons they had learned. They learned about the price of forgetting that humans were not just another species, but the species that had once reshaped the galaxy through sheer force of will. The new Galactic Council was different from the old one. It was based on cooperation rather than dominance, on mutual respect rather than assumed superiority. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had taught it to be better, but the most important change was in the archives. The records of the hegemony wars were unsealed and made available to every species in the galaxy. The warning carved into dead worlds was translated into every language and broadcast to every world. Never challenge humans, the message read. Not because they are aggressive, but because they are adaptable. They become what their enemies force them to become, and in doing so, they become something their enemies can never defeat, themselves, but harder. Elder Whisper of the Void floated in the new council chamber, watching as beings from across the galaxy worked together to solve problems that had once been settled by force. The humans had kept their promise. They had not become conquerors. But the Elder also remembered the records from the archives, the accounts of what humans became when they were truly threatened. The galaxy had been lucky this time. The humans had shown mercy because they could afford to. The Elder hoped that no one would ever be foolish enough to test what humans became when mercy was no longer an option. The oldest galactic rule had been forgotten once, and the galaxy had paid the price. Now it was remembered again, carved not just into dead worlds but into the living memory of every species that had learned to respect the quiet strength of humanity. Never challenge humans. The galaxy had learned why that rule existed, and they would never forget again.